I'm Alex Hollingsworth, leader of Oxford City Council and councillor for Barton here on the edge of Oxford. I'm here in Barton at the neighbourhood centre to show you some good practice and some bad practice in something that concerns me a great deal. And that's the spaces round buildings. We're very good at buildings in Oxford. We've got some famous old buildings and some wonderful new buildings. But over the years, at different times, there have been some terrible mistakes made, not necessarily in the buildings themselves, but how people use those buildings and how in particular they use the spaces around those buildings. And what I want to show you today is the importance of being clear about what's private space and what's public space, and what happens if you aren't clear about that. Because if you look around this area, in fact any area in this city and beyond, you will see that where it's not clear who's responsible for looking after a space, that space ends up in a mess and in a state of decline. And that's a real problem, and it's a problem that's often overlooked in urban design and in planning and in architecture. This short road here has got some very clear examples of good practice and bad practice. And our first example of bad practice is just over there. Boundaries are very important, and yet there we've got a classic example of how not to do it. The boundary between the parking area, the supposedly private space, completely unclear, and as a result, a mess. These are classic examples of bits of land that are neither one thing nor the other. They're not public, they're not private, they're not part of somebody's garden, but yet they're not very obviously a public space either. And the result is this. They don't get looked after, neglected, and it's very difficult to see who's going to take responsibility for them. This is another example of a space that's neither one thing nor the other. It sits between the public and the private, and as such, the definition of who looks after it is a problem. Whereas to the right is a more recent building. The boundary is much clearer. The occupants know where their responsibility, where their property starts, and where the pavement that runs next to it ends. And as a result, it works much better. And this is a piece of parkland. It's very clearly a public space, a place for local people to play, to walk their dogs, ride their bikes, stand in the rain like we're doing today. But it's very clearly a piece of public land, and the definition of it is something that everyone can understand. And as you can see, it's, as a result, looked after. So what I've shown you is not some kind of cliched version of public good or private bad or the other way round. The point is that if people know who's responsible for something, it'll get looked after. It's when the responsibility isn't clear that the problems start. And looking ahead to 2015, I hope that we will continue to look after those little things, those pieces of land around our iconic buildings or even our ordinary buildings, and make sure that the mistakes of the 70s and the 80s aren't reproduced for the people of 2015.